Hello, I'm Laura Cassidy from the American Chemical Society. Welcome to this media briefing from ACS Fall 2021. We're joined today by Dr. LiLi Zyzak from Eastern Kentucky University. She's sniffing out which plant-based burgers smell the most like real beef. Dr. Zyzak.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about our research. Our lab has been focused on understanding plant-based meat, and particularly plant-based hamburger at this point. The plant-based industry itself has grown exponentially within the last decade. Now, the area of the plant-based meat has really taken off in the last couple of years. Well, more than a couple of years now. So if you look at their mission statement, they see plant-based meats as a sustainable food source by establishing that their products use substantially less resources to produce and that they generate much less greenhouse gas emissions, if you will. So for the plant-based products, they are seen as the meats of the future, if you will. You have larger companies that are driving this awareness, such as your Beyond Meat, Impossible Food, Nestle, Kellogg's, and quite a few of these smaller companies also. Now, because there are so many plant-based hamburger in the market right now, it allows us to really do a really good landscaping of the category. So with that in mind, we set out to focus on identifying which of these products now is closest to the real hamburger in regards to aroma. So in doing so, and we also try to figure out if there's any differences among themselves. And so in order to create beef flavor from plant protein, it's not an easy task. So if I can have the first slide. Okay. So if you look at, so we're really, what these companies are doing is really trying to use plant proteins to create beef flavor. And if you were to smell a raw hamburger, and most of us don't, but if you try, if you smell raw hamburger, there's really not much aroma to it. It is really during the cooking process that you really can smell or generate that aroma. So what that tells us then, or implies, is that there must be starting material or precursor compounds that upon heating will convert to these aroma molecules that we all associate with cooked hamburger. Now, if you look at the top part of the slide, you see all these precursors, and they are very known to everybody who's in the food industry. So these precursors are your amino acids, your nucleotides, your thiamine, glutathione, sugars, and lipids. Now, the thing about these precursors is they exist both in the animal and the plant proteins. And the problem, or if you will, is that they exist in different ratio. That's why they do smell differently. Now, it's very complex in terms of generating that aroma hamburger, and if you of the hamburger. So if you look at the bottom of the slide, the complexities are shown here. So the diagram shows that all these precursors play a role in the generation of the beef flavor. So it's not just one compound per se that generates that flavor. It's a mixture of all of them. So when we think of flavor itself, we can think of it from two different perspectives, if you will. We have the aroma that we just talked about. Then you have the taste component. Now, if you look at the top right of the slide, these are some of the naturally occurring taste compounds that enhance that overall flavor perception of hamburger for all of us. So these are naturally occurring. And now these compounds give us this character that we refer to as umami character. And they give us this savory, brothy mouthfeel. And those are very important in hamburger. Now, for this presentation, we're going to focus on the aroma component. So to address the aroma component, we set out to use a technique known as gas chromatography olfactometry, or GCO in short. And then we correlate that to our sensory work. Now, on this slide here, you see one of my students actually sniffing the odor on the olfactory port. As he detects an odor, he will use a clicker and mark the chromatogram where the odor eluded. And then he gives it a descriptor. He'll say it's green, or it's buttery, it's meaty, it's fatty. So that is kind of a personal choice of words in terms of how do you use it, just how do you describe that odor. However, the mass spec itself now will allow us to identify the exact compound that eluded at that exact time. So even though you and I may describe it differently, but the mass spec gives us the exact compound that we identified at that retention time. So once we have that between the GCO work and the mass spec work, we then go to the rest of all the compounds and then look at the different levels of these compounds that we've identified among these different products. And then from there, we will be able to hypothesize which compounds are really driving the sensorial differences in these products. So this technique is very commonly used in a lot of food products. So we've identified about 100 compounds with our mass spec. Out of those 100-something compounds, about 30 or so are odor distinct or odor active compounds. Okay, so now if you look at the next slide, what we've done is then we took these analytical data. So a lot of the compounds are your 2-methyl-3-furanthiol, which gives us that meaty aroma. And then the buttery aroma is caused by a compound called acetylene. Now, if you look at this here, this is really what we call principal component analysis, or PCA, of the solid phase microextraction GCMS data that we collected. Here we show products of Beyond, Impossible, Incognito, and Emerge in relationship to the beef hamburger. Now, if you look at the chart to your left, that is what we call the observations plot. So the observations plot just kind of gives you a really quick view of which one is closer to our control, which is the beef hamburger. So if you're looking at that, the Beyond is closest to the beef hamburger. And then you look at the plot beside it, which is what we call the biplot. The biplot then tells us the exact compounds that are driving these products, whether it's closer or further away from the beef hamburger. So if you look at the compounds, the 1-octane-3-ol and hexanol, octanol, and nonanol, these are from lipid oxidations. So those are really the ones that are driving the Beyond and the beef hamburger closer to each other. And the others are much farther away from the beef hamburger. And you can tell they definitely have much higher levels of more the pyrazines, streptolaldehydes, and sulfury compounds. And so that kind of explains these the differences of the aroma when we smell them. So our sensory data, which is not shown here, that we smell that the beef hamburger itself has more of a meaty, fatty, buttery aroma. And so does Beyond. Beyond is more meaty and buttery, but not quite that charred smell that we smell from the beef hamburger. Impossible, on the other hand, has a yeasty grain, caramelized note. And Incognito has a strong sulfury note, which we think is more an onion-like. So it's actually the compound we identify is really the dimer of the 2-methyl-3-furanthiol. So that gives that oniony odor, if you will. And the Emerge has more of a sweet barbecue sauce-like aroma. So a lot of the data we now correlate back to the sensory data that we have. It's a tricky thing in flavor because the browning reaction that we call Maillard reaction gives us that meaty aroma, but the specificity of it is really from the fat degradation. So that's why that's a really challenging thing for a lot of these companies in terms to determine is that right fatty aroma profile. So if you look at the ingredients, you'll be able to tell the 18.1 is the regular beef hamburger. So now if you lean towards 18.2, then all of a sudden, which is the unsaturated fatty acids, then you will have more of a chicken aroma. So the fat that these companies use are your canola oil, sunflower oil, and your coconut oil. So that mixture that ratio is a very tricky area. Now, since this whole data, we've analyzed a couple more samples. We actually analyzed the Beyond Newer product and also the Awesome Burger from Nestle and also Tyson, actually. And so we do see some differences in some of the products. Now, Beyond, even the new one, is still consistently closest to the beef hamburger. Now, the interesting part now is that the Awesome Burger actually follow really closely right behind Beyond. So we did notice that. So now if I can have the next slide. Now, then the question is then, how do you collect these aroma? It's just me smelling it or someone else smelling it. So then here's what we're doing right now is that we are actually developing a novel aroma collection device that will enable the collection of the aroma X source. And then we can analyze it from there. So we're actually capturing the aroma as we're cooking the hamburgers. And then use that to analyze. So with that, we're hoping to really unlock that characteristic hamburger aroma chemical footprint.
Thank you, Dr. Zyzak. Now I'd like to ask you a few questions about your work. So first of all, what method did you use to cook the burgers in this study?
Okay, so to cook the hamburger, we use a griddle, and we set the temperature at 325, but we also measured internal temperature. So we measure at 160 for all of them, and we cooked all of them about 4 minutes each side. So we're consistent in, really trying to maintain consistency in the cooking method for all of them.
Okay. And do you think the cooking method could impact the aroma and the odor compounds released?
I don't think so. I think unless you burned it. But the aroma is fairly strong. You can pick it up fairly quickly. You can definitely smell the difference between the products. Okay. So that's why we're hoping to use the device that we're developing right now to capture the aroma as we cook them. So then that would give us definitely a much more precise data in terms of the cooking time and temperature also.
Okay. And for the olfactometry experiments, how many people did you use to sniff the aromas? And did they tend to agree on whether a particular aroma was meaty, fatty, buttery, and so on?
So actually there are actually 5 of us that did the same thing, the same samples. And so we're pretty consistent in, like I say before, you and I may describe something differently. I may say it's buttery. You may say it's not buttery, but more fatty a little bit. However, that's just our personal description. However, when we correlate that back to the GCMS data, it gives us the specific elution time. So that tells us the exact compound. So whether you describe as fatty and me describe as buttery, that's irrelevant in the sense that compound tells us, the mass spec data tells us exactly what the compound is. Now, you will have your own list of descriptors, and I will have my own list of descriptors as time goes on, as we collect more data. So as long as we're consistent within myself and or within you, it doesn't really matter how we describe it. What matters, yeah, what tells us, what's important is the mass spec tells us exactly the exact compound that eluted at that specific time.
I see. Okay. And how do food companies try to make plant-based burgers smell like real beef? And based on your research, which approaches are the most successful?
I think, like I mentioned a little bit earlier in the talk, and I didn't want to go too much into it earlier. Um, the trick is really the profile of the fatty acid. Okay, so beef in general has more what we call unsaturated 18.1. Now, chicken would have more 18.2. So a lot of the companies have used coconut oil as the main ingredient, in the sense that coconut oil has a melting point where it gives us at room temperature, it gives us that white chunks of fat that looks like fat in the meat itself, in the product itself, I should say. So if you buy a beef hamburger, it has that fat chunks, right? So how do you make something look like that? So what a lot of the plant-based company does is they use coconut oil to mimic that look. So it's a little bit of that too. But at the same time, you still have also the 18.1. So that how do you mimic that fatty, meaty note? So canola oil has the highest level of the 18.1. And sunflower has about 20% canola. I think it's about 60 to 70%, somewhere around there. And then sunflower is about 20 to 30%. So if you look at Beyond, they use canola oil and coconut oil. Now, Impossible use sunflower oil. So it has a higher content of 18.2. So I don't really know their reasoning for doing all that, which I'm sure they all have it. But just looking at the data that we have, I think that canola oil is going to be driving it closer to the real beef hamburger, because it's a mixture. It's like I said, it's not one compound that gives us the hamburger aroma perception. It's a blend of everything, sugary, buttery, that all that has to the right ratio, and that's the tricky part.
Right. Okay. And I understand companies have to try to cover up some of the plant's aromas, like peas have, the pea protein has a strong green grassy smell.
Right.
And so how do they try to do that usually?
And yeah, I think that comes into picture with some of the products, because you can definitely smell the barbecue in the merge. You can smell that barbecue sauce when you put it on that grilled meat. It's got that barbecue smell. So it's got a sweet perennial type smell. And then the Incognito has the onion. So a lot of these products that we see, they've added a lot of spices to try to cover it. So now the problem with that is that it also drives it further and further away from the actual beef hamburger. So the dimer from that 2-methyl-3-furanthiol in the Incognito, you definitely smell an onion. Like one of us think it's more oniony, and a couple others think it's more garlicky. So it's that kind of flavoring. So you can over flavor it, and I understand that why they would want to, but you can over flavor it. So I would say tone back a little bit on the flavoring and focus more on the profile of the actual beef itself.
Did you taste any of the burgers? And if so, did you think the best tasting ones were also the ones that smelled closest to a real hamburger?
Yes, I did. I tasted every one of them. So the one that's actually, the Beyond does definitely taste a lot closer to the real hamburger, and the newer version is actually even closer. And it actually didn't leave such a taste in your mouth that you think it's something else. But it's definitely much closer. It's not beef, but it's still much closer.
Great. I understand that one of your goals is to develop a mixture of odor compounds that closely resembles real hamburger aroma. How far away are you from that? And do you think you've identified the major compounds, or are more studies still needed?
We've identified quite a few major compounds. And again, the trick is that if you smell raw hamburger, there's not really any aroma. So it's in the cooking that somehow in the cooking process, it activates and have these reactions going on that now deliver these aroma compounds. So then, we have this device that we're developing right now to capture the aroma as it's been cooked. And even though we can identify all those, now back to the other question is then maybe there were precursor compounds that generated those aroma compounds. So then we should go back and analyze also the other process would be to analyze what are the precursors. Once we've identified the compounds, we could probably backtrack and figure out what the precursors were and then go from there and see if indeed those changes, if we were to change the ratio of the precursors. So I think, I just think I am hypothesizing right now. I think that's what Beyond it must be doing, that they are looking at the precursors to mimic the hamburger. Because if you just take hamburger, the aroma itself, and add on to the plant-based, you're not going to get that same profile. So it's the cooking process. But the cooking process is also now cooking up your precursor or starting material. So then you go back and figure out what your starting material are. So we're closer, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us. So.
Very interesting. All right, to conclude, what do you want viewers to take away from your talk? What's the key conclusion or message?
I think a lot of us shy away from plant-based. If we are a meat and potato type person, myself included, once someone tells you, oh, it's plant-based product, and you say, oh, but it's actually not quite as bad. And I've tasted every one of them right now, and they're actually not too bad. And so I would say it's not necessarily for caloric count at this point, the products. But it's more for a health benefit standpoint. So if you are looking at it from counting calories standpoint, this is not what you want to say, this is going to solve your problem in terms of counting calories. This is more for health benefits type, per se.
Right. And there's some environmental aspects to it as well.
Exactly.
I understand.
So that's a big issue right now, especially, and even over pandemic with the shortage of meat and all that. So there's things to think about that we need to be more aware of, definitely all that is going on. So.
Thank you. Media briefings for ACS Fall 2021 will be posted throughout the meeting at www.acs.org/ACS Fall 2021 briefings.